Anthony Michael Hall stars in the upcoming film The Class, filmed right here in the Chicagoland area, a movie inspired by the iconic John Hughes film, The Breakfast Club. He's also the executive producer of this film. We got to meet last summer, and thank you so much for joining me to chat about this film.
Rudy, it's good to see you again. Thank you as well. Thank you for supporting The Class from its inception. Yeah, we met last summer. Thanks.
It's coming out September 9th in select theaters. It's also going to be a video on demand. Let's talk a little bit about the plot of the film.
Sure. Well, you know what? It took me completely by surprise when this project came to me through a mutual friend. And Nikki and I struck up a friendship. I read the screenplay. I was really impressed with his work. He really did a great job. And it's important just to delineate, it's an homage to The Breakfast Club, but it's certainly not a remake. It's an original film. But in this case, we have 6 kids instead of 5. We shot the picture at Elmhurst University, which was a great shout out to Elmhurst University. They were a great institution and great partners to have on the film. So we used their campus, and we were able to shoot in one of their buildings on campus, and that was great. And so that functioned as our high school. They're dealing with real world issues that, not to say that they didn't exist 35 years ago when we made the original film, but they're certainly very relatable, whether it's kids dealing with their own sexuality or alcoholism, or one of them is dealing with a life-threatening disease. There's a lot of really interesting high stakes that Nikki kind of gave to all the characters and their personal biographies. And so when all the characters collide in Class, that's led by Debbie Gibson's character, it's really powerful. And it really kicks off in a very similar way that the original film did, where layers start coming off and all the issues start being revealed, and they kind of reveal themselves to each other, in the film. And so that was the template from the original that we took. We were able to get John Kapelos, who was in the original. He played the janitor in The Breakfast Club. And he came back and played an uncle to Charlie Gillespie's character. They have a great, on-screen presence together as uncle and nephew. But just really impressive, like the work that everybody did, and the quality of the writing made it very exciting to do this kind of film now.
The character of Falk, tell us a little bit about who you play and a little bit of his background.
Right. Well, he's the principal, and Falk has a lot of Dean Vernon in him. That was the character that people remember from The Breakfast Club that Paul Gleason played. And Paul turned out to be a great friend of mine. So Professor, the Principal Falk is a tough character. He's hard around the edges, not unlike Paul Gleason's character in the original Breakfast Club film. But there's an interesting turn that this character makes, in addition to Debbie, because they really kind of start to get involved in the kids' lives in a way that they didn't expect and anticipate.
I heard John Kapelos speak about this recently, especially about The Breakfast Club, and with this, movie, as well too, is that kids aren't judged, and this is kind of a time where kids are kind of getting their identity away from their parents and kind of finding their own. And nobody was like, here's this outcast, or here's somebody it was just different personalities coming together, people trying to find themselves. And that's why people could identify with the first film, and definitely, something anticipated, for The Class.
Absolutely, because I had many years, obviously, to think about what was it that worked about The Breakfast Club, and how was it, and why was it so impactful. And I think, in a funny way, it's almost like some unconscious form of group therapy. When people watch that film, they start projecting themselves onto one character or a combination of characters that they relate to or related to. And I hopefully it'll be the same thing with this film, because again, the characters are very modern, and because we're bringing to life kids that are millennials, right? We had to give them real world issues and real world challenges. And I think that that's something that even John Hughes would be proud of with this film. We really did that. We were able to kind of raise the stakes for all their characters and kind of up the ante on the issues and the things that they're dealing with, so that when that collision happens and they all kind of come undone and start revealing themselves to each other, it's powerful, it's impactful.
Let's talk a little bit about your career, because especially in the early years between Vacation and the John Hughes movies, I mean, you're from the East Coast, but your career, especially in those early years, Chicagoland, formed so much of, who you are.
It's so true that you said that, Rudy. And honest to God, from the time I set foot back in Chicago, I just felt it. I loved it. I went downtown. I started looking for restaurants and places that John Hughes used to take me, whether it was Kingston Mines or the Checkerboard Lounge or just going downtown. So my wife, who's from Eastern Europe, I really wanted to give her a sense of that. So I made sure that she saw that you can't get a bad meal in Chicago and you don't get a small meal in Chicago. But we took the architectural tour and toured the city, and I was able to do that with my family. And my mother came to town. My sister came and visited with her daughter. And it was just a great experience just to be back in Chicago and doing it in that hometown. And like you said, I mean, it's like a second home for me. I feel such a love and a respect for the people there and just the energy of Chicago. And I love being there. And so we shot at Elmhurst University, and as I said, they were a great partner. So we were out in the suburbs, but I also made sure I got back into the city. And man, it was just great. It was such a great feeling to be back home there again, because it feels like a home to me.
And of course, not to date, but myself or yourself as well too. But with the class, we got to see a couple of updates on social media, and a lot of the stars shared. I'm in Chicago. Here's some behind the scenes photos. But when the Breakfast Club and these early '80s movies were made, there was no social media, so you got to do these wonderful things in Chicagoland. Did you take personal photographs? Was John photographing these things, or is it just stories that you get to share now?
Well, it's a great point, because at the time we would have like a still photographer documenting us behind the scenes, working on the movie, shooting scenes in between breaks. So, but you're right, you would be sort of, relegated to finding those old images that came from the studio or were issued by the studio. And this time, you're right, everybody's taking pictures and enjoying it. And it was really funny. At one point when we wrapped, all the kids wanted me to do the thing where, like, in the Breakfast Club, when I'm smoking a joint, there's that image of me like holding a joint with the glasses on. And that was when we wrapped all the kids in the class. They had said nothing about the Breakfast Club for the entire 5 weeks we made the film. But it was really important on the day that we wrapped. It was actually Hannah Kepler's idea, who's on Cobra Kai, and she's wonderful in the film. She came up to me because there's something we want to do, Mike. Are you cool? I go, what is it? And someone had like a little fake dude, right? And so everybody took a picture with the joint in their mouth with glasses on. And I was like, all right, that's awesome. I feel old now, but I get it. I get what you guys want to go for. So it was really wonderful, because that film, it really impacted them. Even them, and they're all in their early 20s, and they're just out of high school barely. But that was a film that mattered to them too. So they were really excited. They were really pumped to do a great job, and they knew obviously it's a separate and its own entity. It's a different film, but it was great that it was inspired by a film that young generations still watch, which is incredible.
That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other castmates. Charlie Gillespie, which I knew he was popular. I knew he was a great actor, but knowing just how many fan sites are out there, how many fans were so excited to see him in Downers Grove last year, the social media following. Talk a little bit about him and like the magic of Charlie Gillespie.
Yeah, no, he's a talented kid. He's very talented. He's from Canada. He's got a good work ethic. And he had this show called Julie and the Phantoms, which I guess had a big international following. It got canceled, unfortunately, but he's had a good run. He's a young up and coming actor, and he's a very handsome kid. He's got a lot of charisma, but all the kids in this film do. They really do. They have a lot of charisma, a lot of charm and intelligence, and it all comes through in the film. About half of our cast, like Charlie, had been working for a little while. There's also Lyric Ross, who's wonderful. She's on This Is Us, and she's since been cast in a Marvel series she's going to be on, and she's an old soul. She's a fantastic.
She's also from the Chicagoland area, so it was great to have her back in the area.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and her mother was lovely. She was always nearby and on set. And then also Hannah Kepler, who's on Cobra Kai, who's more of a Southern belle. I think she grew up in North Carolina, and she's wonderful. But on the Breakfast Club, it was like, I think Judd and Amelia were in their early 20s, and they were playing teenagers, where Molly and I actually had to go work with the tutor and go do our homework at night. So we didn't really socialize like the way this group did. So that was a wonderful outcome, that all these kids really hit it off, and they really became friends, and they still are, and they stayed in touch, which is great. So
that's a sign of a great movie, that you bond so well that afterwards you still want to continue those that friendship. As far as Debbie Gibson, were you friends in the 80s? Was this the first time that you've actually gotten to have spend as much time with her, or have you guys known each other for a while?
You know what? It was so funny, because some photos emerged online when we were making the film about a party that I went to. And I think it might have been for Debbie or so. I think it was actually Debbie's party. And it was like one of my first Hollywood events. I was only like 17 at the time. So these photos reemerged. And I guess in the blur of time and decades gone by, I had forgotten, but we had met when I was a kid. So we did meet when I was younger. I was at her birthday party here in Hollywood. And I'm sure we ran into each other a few other times, but we really became friends on this film. And she was great. She invited my wife and I to her show in Vegas, and we went to Vegas after the wrap of the film and saw her perform. And she's just really cool. She's just got a heart full of gold. She really is awesome. We're also both happen to be Italian Americans, so we we connected on a number of levels, and she's also from New York. She grew up in Long Island. I grew up in New York City, but I really like Debbie. I really hit it off with her, and she's a really nice lady. She's got a lot of heart. And I thought as an actress, I thought she was great. She was effortless. I mean, I thought she was really natural and very likable in the film.
Oh, I mean, between her Broadway work and her music career and her film work, I mean, this is just, it's a natural progression for her.
Totally, totally. And you're right. She had all that background in theater and doing musicals. And so she's a natural. She was really just really easygoing and a lot of fun to work with. And the kids loved her too. They really did.
I do want to ask, as far as Vacation and Breakfast Club go in the early 80s, and then you were on Saturday Night Live. Usually what I hear is, as far as like someone getting kind of plucked out of obscurity or coming from a small background, and then Saturday Night Live gives them that big platform to go on to bigger things. How did that whole thing happen as far as you getting on the show, especially having a career behind you already?
Yeah, it kind of worked in reverse. You're right on with that, Rudy. In my case, I had the good fortune of working with and for John Hughes as a kid. I had done Vacation, which was his script, even though I didn't meet him, and then the 3 films that we made together. So my trajectory was it was kind of the opposite of what it usually is. Yeah. Usually people start doing Second City or The Groundlings, and then they work their way up as improv actors or stand-up comedians. So I didn't have that background, but to be honest, my heroes when I was growing up were George Carlin and Richard Pryor. So I was the kid like reading Cream magazine, listening to Van Halen and the Police, and then listening to comedy albums. But I also loved all those films that we saw in the 70s growing up, Stripes and Meatballs and all these comedies, Animal House, So I felt like I had this real upbringing in comedy because my heroes were comedians, and I would always watch those comedies and love them. So you have to imagine my life, it was like magic to me because suddenly I'm in high school and I'm working with these people and I'm surrounded by John Hughes or Chevy or John Candy so by the time I got SNL, I got to tell you, Rudy, it scared the shit out of me. I agreed to do it because Lorne Michaels asked me, right? And I got to tell you, I was 17 years old. I was just coming off these 3 films. I was living with my parents in New York City. And after I accepted, I remember walking around the city like in a daze because I was like, oh my God. Because I was home like the year before watching Eddie Murphy every weekend on SNL, who was like,
and now you're on the same stage.
Yeah. So like all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit, I agreed to this. And I remember being kind of like shell shocked, walking around the city like, oh my God, I'm going to be on SNL. I'm getting chills now talking about it because I remember being totally excited and like shit my pants nervous too.
Well, just recently. Yeah, and just recently, Madonna released her 50 #1 hits, a compilation album, and you got to be on an episode with her. What do you remember about, that episode? I mean, she was the biggest star, in 1985. I mean, she still was a huge star, but 1985 was her year.
You're not kidding, man. You're not kidding. And I was like many a guy and woman too, I'm sure, that had a crush on her. She was beautiful. She was dynamic. She had great charisma. That was another one of those moments. And I think that was actually our first episode. So just to give you a quick flash, like I was tripping out because I had scenes with her and we'd do rehearsals and she was very petite as she is, but had great charisma. And I just remember being so nervous around her. I just couldn't stop staring at her. And she was a beautiful lady, but had great charisma and great focus. And I remember that, hitting me. And then it's so funny. I was showing my wife recently on YouTube. We did like the bumper, the commercials for the upcoming episode. And they paired me off with Madonna. And there I am, Beanpole, Anthony Michael Hall. And I'm like a 1.5 feet taller than her. And I'm weighing about 100 pounds wet, and there's Madonna. And she was fun, man. She was really cool. I remember her focus and I remember her being really cool and fun to work with. But even on that episode, like it was a trip. Like Sean Penn was there in the audience. I've always been a big fan of his. And the after parties, they're no joke. They're notorious. Like the after parties are phenomenal. And I remember David Bowie was there and Andy Warhol. I mean, these experiences I had as a kid were amazing. So, the parties were incredible. It was a 6-day-a-week job. But then once the show was wrapped at 1 a.m., everybody would party to the wee hours. You'd be up till the early morning of Sunday, because the after party was great. And then, New York nightlife in the 80s was something else. So great memories, man.
Recover on Sunday and then go back to work on Monday.
You're not kidding. That's how it was. It was a very rock and roll type of job. It was like theater, live TV, stand-up, everything rolled into one,
Well, I've been a big fan of your project for the longest time and so excited for everyone to start seeing this film starting on September 9th, The Class.